Hey, we're in this series called Above the Noise, because life is pretty noisy, isn't it? Life can be very noisy, very distracting, very chaotic. I don't know if you've noticed that we live in a sort of, kind of chaotic world, and we've lived through a sort of kind of chaotic time the last couple years. And so this series is about leaning into that question. Is it possible to live a life of clarity while in a world of chaos? Like, is it possible? And if it is possible, then how in the world do we rise above the noise in our lives and actually live a life of clarity? And the good thing about this is, like, whether you follow Jesus or not, I don't know all of your stories, but all of us, I would imagine, on some level, we want to live a life of clarity. I've never met a person who's like, I love chaos. I just want to live my life confused. I've never met that person. Like, we all want clarity. It's a really beautiful thing, and it feels like sometimes impossible to have in the world that we live in. But the good news is it's not possible, and the even better news, it's not as complicated as we make it, but it's just remembering a few simple practices and principles. And so over the course of the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about some of those practices and principles and ways we can rise above the noise. And so today I want to talk about how to rise above comparison. I want to talk about how to rise above the noise of comparison. I did a poll on Canvas's Instagram yesterday. I think it was yesterday. Yeah, yesterday, just saying, hey, who has ever, dealt with or battled with or faced comparison? And I put the poll out there, and I knew what it was going to lead to. I knew what the results were going to be, and it was 100% of every person that responded said, absolutely, I've dealt with comparison. I've battled with comparison. I've struggled with comparison. I live my life sort of looking over my right shoulder and my left shoulder at others and kind of basing where I am off of where somebody else is. Comparison is a battle that we all face, so let's talk about it, right? Because comparison just adds to the noise of our life, and it'll be really hard to have a life of clarity if you find yourself drowning in the waters of comparison. And so let's talk about this. And, again, whether we believe all the same things or not, all of us have dealt with this, and probably for many of you, our battle with comparison started around the same time that my battle with comparison started, and that's around junior high and high school. Some of us have great high school and junior high experiences, and some of us maybe not, but all of us during those years battled with comparison because everyone is looking for their group during those years. Everyone is trying to find their gifting and their lane during those years. And I remember when I was in sixth grade, I thought I was going to be a professional athlete. I love basketball. And I was convinced that God had called me to be a professional basketball player. And I remember going to my dad, and I remember like it was yesterday, he was doing laundry. And he was doing laundry. I went in the laundry room, and I don't know why I felt like this was the moment to tell my dad what I was going to do with the rest of my life. But I went in there, I'm like, Dad, I know what I'm going to do with my life. And he's like, what are you going to do with your life? So I said, Dad, I'm going to be a professional basketball player in the NBA. And my dad, while he's folding the clothes, didn't even stop folding. He just, and really didn't even look at me. He just said, well, Travis, I have some bad news for you. No one in our family is taller than 6 feet, and you might need to find another dream. And maybe not the most inspirational speech I've ever gotten from my dad before, but it turns out he was right. Not only did I not surpass 6 feet, but it also turns out I'm not the most athletic person. And there are a lot of people who are far more athletic than I will ever be on my best day. I remember when I was in junior high as well, my grandma, she told me how smart I was, and she would also say how pretty I was, which was always awkward. I would come over and she's like, Travis, you're so pretty. I'm like, Grandma, don't call me pretty. And then I got into high school, and it turned out my grandma was lying because I wasn't very smart. And turned out I wasn't very pretty. I didn't do very good on tests, and I was never really the most popular guy in high school or junior high. And in high school, it was just interesting years. And the first high school I went to, I say first because I ended up getting suspended and going to a different high school, and that's a totally different story. But my first high school that I went to, it was full of very wealthy families. And I knew this, and you would know this as soon as you enter the parking lot, because every car there was like a Benz, a Mercedes is a Benz. I don't even know cars. They're fancy cars, all right? They're fancy cars in the parking lot, and I always felt just like this battle with comparison driving in because I did not come from a wealthy family. I did not have a nice car. In fact, I drove a purple minivan all throughout high school. There's no way you get any street cred or cool points driving a purple minivan. I would like Blair Tupac to try and make up for it, but it never worked. It was just the worst thing thing every day, driving into school in the Barney Mobile. And I just felt that battle with comparison all the time. And throughout junior high and high school, I just didn't quite feel like I fit anywhere, right? And this made it a struggle to really like anybody truly, because I was not like anybody. And it felt like the only way I could be liked by anybody would be to try and be like everybody, because it seemed like people liked people who were only like them. And so I always lived with this fear, though, that people would find out that I'm not like everybody, and then I would no longer be liked by anybody. Can anybody relate to that? And this was my first experience really with comparison. And I learned early on in my life, and this is a hard truth, and you're gonna be like, this is kind of a downer, but it's a truth that I learned on early in my life, and if we're honest, we all know this is true, and that is that there's always going to be someone who's better than you at something. There's always going to be someone who is better than you at something. It's a hard truth to hear. It's a hard thing to acknowledge. There's going to be people, though, who are richer, who are, I don't know, what others would call prettier or more popular or smarter or more talented, or, no matter who you are, no matter where you go, it feels like there will always be someone with more than you. You know what I'm talking about? They just have a little more And so what I did, and I don't know about you, but I did this, is I would then go and try and find people with less Because when I could find people with less then I would feel superior. And we all want to live and feel like we got it going on. And I'm not sure this dynamic ever really fully goes away. But some of us, and you know these people, they're not content with just they want to have est, right? They don't want they want to be an S. They want to be the richest. They want to be the smartest. They want to be the healthiest. They want to be the cutest. They want to be the most retweeted est. And so we try our best to have more est, and it never quite feels like it's enough. Because it always seems like you look around and there's always someone with a little more or a little more est than you. And it's taken me a long time to learn this. And I'll be honest, I don't know if I fully get it each and every day. I'm still learning it. But I wish I would have learned it earlier. And that is that there is never, ever, ever a win in comparison. There's never, ever, ever a win in your life in comparison. I've yet to ever meet a person that's living a full and joyful and peaceful and happy life. I'm like, what is it? What is it that makes you the way that you are? And they're like, you know what I do? I just compare myself to everybody. I've not met that person. The people who are most full of peace and joy and happiness, there's this deep and rich contentment that they seem to have. In fact, if you ever want to live that life of contentment, which I'm sure you do, I'm convinced it cannot and will not ever happen when you're living a life of comparison, because nothing kills contentment quicker than comparison. And we might try and avoid this, and we might say, comparison's not all that bad, right? Because I'm just trying to maximize my potential. But really, when we live a life of comparison, what we're doing is we are competing against somebody else's potential, and they don't even know we're competing with them. It's like me at a red light. If you pull up to me at a red light, you may not know we're racing, but we're racing as soon as that light turns green. And I plan on going much faster than you. It's a problem. Pray for me. But for many of us, it's like how we're living life. It's like we see someone pull up next to us, and we're immediately in a race against somebody that doesn't know that we're racing them. And there's this whisper inside of you that says you need what that person has, that est that they have, if you're ever going to be respectable, acceptable, or lovable. And apparently this comparison problem is not a new problem. It's not some 2022 problem. It's not just a San Francisco problem. It's not a millennial problem. It's a problem that we as humans have been wrestling with, for apparently at least, for thousands of years. In fact, Solomon, who's known in the scriptures as the wisest man who's ever lived, he writes this down in Proverbs 14:30. He says this, that envy rots the bones. Envy does something inside of you. It rots you from the inside out. Now, here's the bad news. I don't think that the comparison trap will ever go away. I really don't. I'm not sure that there will be a version of life where you're like, I never deal with the temptation to compare myself to somebody else ever again. I think it would be unfair and for sure unrealistic for me to stand up here and be like, here's 3 ways to never compare again. No, like you're probably going to deal with this on some level throughout the duration of your life. But here's the good news. Comparison does not have to drive your life. It does not have to drive your life. It may show up, but you don't have to invite it inside. And you may not be able to control when comparison shows up and knocks on the door of your heart. But you always have the choice on whether you will allow comparison to take up residence in your heart and soul. And so what I want to talk about today is not how to live a life where we never deal with comparison again, but instead, what do we do when we face that little whisper, that temptation, that drift towards comparison again? In fact, I want you to know something, that the scriptures say that God has called you according to his purposes. Isn't that awesome? Like this infinite God knows you intimately and intimately calls you into this very unique purpose for your life. And our desire, by the way, as a church is we want to see that purpose that God has called you into to become a reality. It's this beautiful truth for each and every one of us. But the question we need to ask is, are you missing God's purpose for your life because you're so busy trying to keep up with God's purpose for somebody else's life? Let me say it again. Are you missing God's purpose for your life, your unique purpose that God has for you because you're trying to keep up with God's purposes for somebody else's life? And so what I want to do today is I hope to do is give a mental line of defense for you. Like give you some phrases that you can begin to speak out loud and say to your soul and speak to your heart when that whisper of comparison starts to speak again. When you feel your soul drifting again towards comparison, I want to give you sort of a mental line of defense using some scripture to give you some phrases that you can anchor your soul to, and I believe ground you in a life of contentment. And so I want to go back to Solomon. Solomon, at this point that we're going to read in Ecclesiastes, Ecclesiastes, by the way, is like one of my most favorite books in the Bible. It's sort of a depressing book, and he's a little emo at times, but it's just a really honest book. If you're like looking for just an honest take on life, Ecclesiastes is awesome. But Solomon, he's writing Ecclesiastes, and he is this old man now, and he's experienced a lot of life, and he's now passing on this wisdom for those who are trying to experience life. And so in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, he says this. He says, I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. Have you ever felt that way? I mean, have you ever felt that way here in San Francisco? Like where it just feels like everyone's trying to outrun somebody else, outdo somebody else, go further in their company, make more money than somebody, make more sales than somebody, have more followers than somebody. Like this city has sort of this competitive spirit to it, doesn't it? And it's not all bad, right? Because we get some incredible innovation because of the drive that exists here in San Francisco. But when we lose the leash on that, it can become pretty toxic, can't it? I was talking to a person at the wedding yesterday who had moved out of San Francisco, and I thought it was so funny because they moved to Reno. And they're like, Reno's awesome. And I told them, I'm like, I've never met a person who's like, where's an awesome place? Reno. And so I was like, tell me what's going on in Reno. And somebody from Reno is probably here today and offended. But they're like, Travis, it was a breath of fresh air. I'm like, why? It was like, because when I talk to people, it didn't feel like people are sizing me up here. It actually felt like they just wanted to get to know me. She said the first question they don't ask in Reno that she always got asked in San Francisco is, hey, what do you do for work? Right? Yeah, we all know that. We live here. We feel it. We experience it. And she's like, it's just a breath of fresh air to just have community and not competition. And I thought that was a really interesting take and it kind of convicted me a little bit. It's like, we got to do better in the city, don't we? And I think the church should be the place where we do the best at this. You see, she was talking about something that is true for all of us, and that is that Solomon seems to believe that everybody is determining where they are based on where everybody else is. If you're looking for like this sort of unhealthy version of comparison, it's determining where you are solely based on where everyone else is. And Solomon, he's like, this is a problem. Because here's what he says next. He says, this too is meaningless. Everyone say meaningless. He's like, it's meaningless. All this work, all this energy, all this competition that's ultimately coming out of envy. He's like, it's all meaningless. And it's the next line that Solomon says that I want you to get in your spirit today. I think this statement will help you when you begin to drift towards comparison. And so I want to read the whole scripture, but it's the last statement that is so important that I want you to not just hear it today, but allow it to sort of speak to you a little bit. Solomon says, I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind, which is sort of a funny mental image. Right? Like if you just saw me outside after church today, I'm just like running around like this. You're like, what are you doing? I'm just chasing the wind. I'm just chasing the wind, trying to catch it. And yet it's that weird sort of humorous image, chasing the wind, that Solomon, he uses to describe people who are just living their lives, determining where they are based on where everyone else is. They're working, they're toiling, they're striving, they're trying to achieve more and more and more to hopefully become whatever status they think they need to be like in order to be liked. And he's like, no, it's chasing the wind. It's chasing the wind. The wisest man who's ever lived, he's like, this life that's constantly chasing something that you cannot catch. He's like, there's no peace in that life. There's no trophy in that life because there's no winning in that life. That life of chasing the wind, it's dissatisfaction guaranteed. Because it steals the joy of your accomplishment. Because there will always be someone who has accomplished more. It steals the joy of your successes because there will always be someone that looks more successful. And so when you catch yourself looking at someone and thinking, like beginning to compare yourself to them, oh, I wish I was like them. I wish I had humor like them. I wish I was as social as they were. I wish I was as wealthy as they were. I wish I was as like a leader like them. I wish I was a parent like them. I wish I was just a little bit more like them. Solomon gives us a great mental line of defense. We need to stop and go, no. I'm chasing the wind. And I'm not going to chase the wind. That's no life for me. No. Oh, they're awesome, but I'm going to stay in my lane and not try and run in theirs. I am who I am. I'm uniquely created and loved by God. God has a purpose for my life. So no, I'm not going to chase the wind. I'm not going to do it. I've been practicing this, by the way, because my most vulnerable window of the week is Sunday afternoon. Because I go on Instagram after church. And like every pastor is like, today was revival. And, all the seats were full. And all of a sudden I'm like, man, is there something wrong with me? I have no. You're chasing the wind, Travis. Quit chasing the wind. Why? Because there's no win in chasing the wind. There's no win in chasing the wind. There is no win in comparison. There is no win in basing where you are off of where somebody else is. There is no win in chasing the wind. And I don't know all of you personally. I don't know all your stories. But I do know this about each and every one of you. And that is your life is too valuable and your life is too short for you to waste it all chasing the wind. Your life is too valuable. Man, I think this is a message San Francisco needs to hear. Your life is too valuable. Your life is too short to spend it chasing the wind. And so when those thoughts of inadequacy and when those thoughts of insecurity and when those thoughts of inferiority and those temptations to be like, if I was just like a little bit more like them, I want you just to pause and maybe you say it out loud. No, that's the wind. I'm not going to chase the wind. My life is too valuable. My life is too short. I'm not going to spend it chasing the wind. Now, unfortunately, Solomon isn't done. He knows what some of us are thinking. Some of you are thinking this, especially like type A, really driven people in this room. Like what Solomon isn't inviting us into here is a passive life where we just let whatever happen. That is not what Solomon is inviting us into. No, he still calls us to live a life of intentionality. He goes on in verse 5, and Solomon, after telling us not to chase the wind, he says this, fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. So he's like, there's this version of life, you're chasing the wind, you're comparing yourself against everybody else, trying to be like everybody, to be liked by everybody. And he's like, that's not a good version of life, but you want to know what's also not a good version of life? The people who are like, well, people are stronger than me, so I'm just not going to try. People are smarter than me. Yeah, they're wealthier than me, they're more successful than me, so I'm just going to fold my hands. It just is what it is. Solomon says, no, that's not a good life because now you're going to ruin yourself. He says that fools just fold their hands. I'm not going to be smart enough. I'm not going to be good enough. I'm not going to be wealthy enough. I'm not going to be successful enough. And so I'm just not even going to try. Why even bother? That's not a good life either. He continues in verse 6. He says, better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. This is just wisdom right here. He said, better is one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing the wind. I love that. And maybe you're like, I don't get why you love it because I don't even understand what he means. But trust me, it's good. He says it's better to have one handful of tranquility, which already maybe for some of us as Western people, as Americans, maybe rubs us the wrong way. Like because we don't want one handful of something, we want two handfuls of something here, don't we? And he's like, no. The path forward, the best life, the fully alive life, it's not just having more and more and more. No, he says a good life is a life where you have one handful of tranquility. That is better than two handfuls with toil and chasing the wind. And so what's tranquility? Tranquility is about satisfaction. Tranquility is when you go to your apartment after work and you're done and you put your bag on the ground and you just breathe out and smile. Because you're happy where you are, and you're happy with who you are, and you're happy with where you are in your life. Tranquility is when you go and you visit your brother who doesn't live in San Francisco, and you go to their house because they can afford such a thing, and you drive through their gates, right? And their butler takes off your jacket. And they have a living room, and it's amazing because like their bed also is not in their living room. It's just a living room. And you're like, oh man, you're living the dream. And this would cost like $5 million in San Francisco. And you know what tranquility is? Tranquility is when you go back to your studio apartment and you get back to your bed, you know, that bed that's in your closet. You can't get in from the side. You have to like Superman into it. After you Superman into your bed, you just go, I'm good. I'm happy for my brother. I'm happy they got that house. I'm happy they have a living room. I'm good with where I'm at. That's tranquility. It's not saying, hey, we're not going to work for more or grow or develop or anything, but it's going, I'm happy with where I am right now. And I'm not going to define where I am based off of where somebody else is. Or maybe you're on Netflix alone and you're watching Netflix and you're scrolling through Instagram and there you see it, that person gets engaged. And you're like, for real, them? Like, how did they get engaged? Does that person not know who this other person is? Like, are you kidding me? And you're just like stewing over this. Yeah, tranquility is when you see it. You can not only double tap that picture and like it, but you go, I'm happy for them. I'm really happy they found their person. And I'm happy with also where I am in my life right now as well. Better is one hand with tranquility than two handfuls of toil and chasing the wind. See, Solomon is telling us that it's better to have less with tranquility than to be in the constant pursuit of more and living a life of striving, stressing, and competing. And he goes on in verse 7. Solomon, he says, again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. He's a real ray of sunshine, isn't he, by the way? Again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling? He asked. This is really interesting because he didn't have a son or brother. And in the ancient world that this was being written in, that means there was no one to pass on his wealth to. And yet, even though he had nothing to pass it on to, there was no vision for the future. He just kept working harder and harder and harder, achieving more and achieving more and gaining more and gaining more and having more. And eventually he gets to this point and he's like, for whom am I toiling? He asks a question that very few of us ask. And as a result, we live drowning in the noise of comparison. This man asks, for whom am I toiling? Which I'm sure is not a question you ask yourself, right? I doubt you sit down at your desk, open your email on Monday and go, for whom am I toiling this week? But maybe we can rephrase the question to make a little more sense. Who am I doing all this for? Have you asked yourself that question? Like, who am I really doing all this for? All this work for the startup, all this work to gain more wealth, all this work to get the promotion, all this work to move up the ladder, all of this achieving and striving and competing. Who am I doing all of this for? What am I trying to prove? And who am I trying to prove it to? Like, who is this all for? Have you ever asked that? And for some of you, even now as we're asking that question, like, who am I doing this for? You already know the answer. You're competing with your brother. Oh, that perfect little brat, right? He can do no wrong. Straight A student council president, prom king. You're just like, he's just the golden child. And you always feel like, I'm competing. Maybe for some of you, it's not a brother, it's a sister that you're competing against. So you're trying to prove something, prove that you are maybe on the same level, or you're just as strong, smart, and successful as they are. Maybe for some of you, it's not a brother or sister, but you're working and achieving and striving and competing because you're actually doing all of this for that parent that never really seemed to give you approval. Like, you're doing this all for your dad that never hugged you and told you that he's proud of you. And so you're like, no, I'm doing it for a paycheck or a promotion. No, but underneath it, it's like you're competing, trying to get this approval from somebody. For some of us, and I see this all the time, that they're trying to get their approval of a parent who is no longer alive. Trying and striving to get to some place that they don't even know where it is, gritting your teeth through all of life. Who are you doing all of this for? Like, have you asked yourself that? Have you ever paused and really thought to yourself, wait a minute, why am I doing this? Why am I doing all this? Like, whose approval am I trying to get? Who am I trying to impress? Who am I trying to be like so that I can be liked? And do they even know? Do they even know I'm doing this? And if they knew, would they even care? Would it even matter? Now, some of us, you might be tempted because you hear this and you're like, I know who I'm doing it for. I'm doing it all for me. Yeah, maybe, but probably not, right? Like, I think if we're honest, like if we really sit in that question for a while, that some of us actually might be surprised, that our instinct might be like, well, I'm just doing it for me. I'm not doing it for anybody else. But if you actually sit in it long enough, you realize, oh, no, I'm racing someone. I am actually competing. I am actually doing this for someone else that isn't me, that isn't God. Who am I doing this for? Because once you answer that question, who am I doing this for? It really begins to breed clarity on what matters most. It really begins to help you rise above the noise of comparison in your life instead of living your life trying to grasp with more toil and chasing the wind both hands. Now you have one handful of tranquility. He goes on, he says in verse 8, he says, why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? So first he goes, like, who am I doing all this toiling for? What am I doing this for? Who am I doing this for? And he's like, why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? And so this man who Solomon is using to represent all of us, by the way, he's not talking about a real man at this point in time. This man is a metaphor for all of us. And he's like, why am I doing everything I'm doing, and I'm doing all of it, and I don't even enjoy any of it? What am I doing to myself? It's because he never answered that question. Why am I doing this to begin with? And perhaps you aren't enjoying your life either. And perhaps you look at your life and you're just simply not enjoying it. And here's the truth about that is that if you're not enjoying your life, nobody else will. If you're not enjoying your life, the people around you, the people you date probably won't enjoy it much either. If you're not enjoying your life, your partner, your kids, they're probably not going to enjoy your life as well. And what's crazy about all of this is that there are likely millions of people in the world that would look at what you do, and they would look at what you have, and they would look at who you know, and they would look at the life you live, and they would consider you to be one of the luckiest people on the earth. But when you look in the mirror, that's not what you think. That's not how you feel. And do you know maybe why you don't? Because you don't know why you're striving. You don't know why you're toiling. You don't know why you're doing all of this in the first place. And even with all the success and achievement, you still don't really enjoy it all that much. One handful of tranquility is better than two hands full of toil and chasing the wind and doing more and striving more and trying more and achieving more. Now, I'm going to say this. I want you to let it sink in. I want you to think about it. Take it into your week and reflect on it. I believe this with everything that's in me, that you will never be who you were born to be as long as you are looking over your shoulder trying to be somebody else. Like, you will never fully be who you were created to be, who God called you to be, if you are living your life looking around your shoulder, comparing yourself to everyone else. Because the energy that you and I expend looking to our left and looking to our right is energy that God has given us to look forward into the purposes that God has called you, not them, you, into. Yeah, contentment looks like running your race in your lane and refusing to chase the wind. And we go back to Solomon when we wrap up. Proverbs 14:30. I only read the second half of it, but I want to read the full verse now. Solomon, he says this. He says, a heart at peace. And who doesn't want that, by the way? A heart at peace. We all want that. He says, a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. Meaning this, you'll never compare your way to peace. Like, I don't care how rich you are, poor you are, successful you are, unsuccessful you think you are, popular you are, or as popular you don't think you're popular or whatever. Like, you cannot compare your way to peace. You cannot compare your way to tranquility. You cannot compare your way to joy. You cannot compare your way to contentment. You cannot win living your life chasing the wind. I can look to people for inspiration, but that begins to backfire in our lives when we look to people not so much for inspiration, but for imitation. And some of us, we're like, I'm looking to them for inspiration, when in fact you're actually looking to them as in order to imitate them. And that will never lead to the life that you were called to live, because you are looking at somebody else running their race in their lane, and God has put you in your lane to run your race. I love what Jordan Peterson, the author of Atomic Habits, he says this. He says, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. Isn't that good? Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not where somebody else is today. Like, if you have to compare yourself, you're like, sorry, dude, I'm going to have to do this. Fine. If you're going to compare, then compare who you were yesterday. You know, like, some of you are like, I'm not where I want to be, but are you where you were? Like, I'm not where I want to be right now this year in my faith. I'm not where I want to be right now in my career. Look at them. No, don't look at them. I want you to look at you. Are you where you were last year? Have you taken a step forward? Yeah, just a step. A step is a step. Forward is forward. It doesn't matter how far or how little it is. You are not where you were yesterday. Let's start there. Compare yourself from where you were yesterday, not where someone else is today. I'm just really passionate about this because I don't want you to miss the life that God has for you. One of our values here at Campus is to be where you are. And I think part of that is being where you are means running your race in your lane. And not looking over your shoulder, left or right, but looking forward into the future that God has uniquely wired and created you to experience for yourself. So I don't want you to miss the life God has for you, and I don't want you to miss what life has for you. And I'm confident you will never experience your life fully until you embrace what's in front of you. And I wish I learned this earlier, and I'm still learning this, but you can learn this now. I'm 35. I wish I learned this at 20. It would have helped me so much through my 20s. And it's helping me a lot in my 30s. Hopefully in my 40s, I get even better. But you know, I'm not where I want to be, but I'm not where I was. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. Are you okay with where your life is? Do you know who you're doing all this for? Do you enjoy life? Friend, let me remind you, God has created you for a really beautiful purpose. Yeah. And so next time you're tempted to scroll through social media where everyone puts their best face forward, their best filter, and you want to compare their highlight reel to your bloopers, let me remind you, there's no win in chasing the wind. So next time you're feeling that drift towards comparison, here's what I want you to do. I want you to pause. I want you to just be still. I want you to say out loud, my life is too good and too short for me to chase the wind. I'm going to run my race, and I'm going to run it in my lane. My life is too good, and my life is too short to waste it chasing the wind. I'm going to run my race. I'm going to run it in my lane. I think that's a pretty good life. Let's pray. God,